Tony Green is a clean tech and sustainability educator and professional. He is a voice for sustainability and the adoption of alternative energy technologies. He has over 15 years of experience as an engineer, as well as sales and marketing in high tech and clean tech. He's also a science instructor and teacher. All this allows him to explain complicated topics in easy to understand terminology. Tony is a founding member of the Tri-Valley chapter of the Citizens Climate Lobby. And I read that he will be speaking at the Indivisible meeting in Livermore this Sunday at the library at 1:30.
Good evening.
Good evening.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tony Green, and tonight I am going to share with you as much as I possibly can about carbon dividend and how it can cause change. Before we started, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the path that we'll take on this presentation. I'll start off with why we need to price carbon, then I will touch on where carbon and dividend comes in, the change that we're looking to cause, and finally, where we need to go from there. And so with no further ado, if there aren't any questions, I'll dive right in. Don't look now, but taxes are due in 4 days. Have you guys done your taxes? If you haven't, I won't tell. As we will see later, perhaps a tax can be used to gather revenue that the government needs for services and infrastructure, but it might not be the best way to drive revenue for alternative energy projects, as well as getting people to move away from the use of fossil fuels. And so I wanted to open with the question of how on earth are we in a position to where we're even thinking about pricing carbon? How are we in a position to where we're even considering how to price carbon? Well, I'm going to tell you what I know. I know that we burn a lot of fossil fuels. And this fossil fuels produces carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, namely methane, water vapor, nitrous oxides, and chlorocarbons. And we burn a lot of it. Now we expect coal, oil, and gas as the normal culprits, but you'd be surprised to know that cement counts for 5% of the global greenhouse emissions because in terms of it's really ubiquitous with our buildings and our roads. And so, but this is the amount of carbon emissions that we emit. And so what's happening is this is causing our atmosphere to warm, which is changing our climate, which is ultimately changing our weather. And here's the result. This is the average temperature of the Earth relative to 1961 to 1990. And as we can see, the path is increasing with really no end in sight. And so science tells us that there could be certain things that could attribute to this. We could attribute it to natural cycles. We could attribute it to the orbit of the Earth. We could attribute it to other scientific factors, but these factors would promote a cooling of the planet. And as we see, the planet is warming. And so what scientists come to believe is that we are causing this warming by our consumption of fossil fuels. And so the question I wanted to ask is, how can this be? Why are we so prone to use fossil fuels? Well, I'd like to share a little story with you. There was a guy named Thomas Edison, and he believed a long time ago that electric vehicles were the way that we wanted to go in terms of transportation. And as history would prove, he was correct. In the beginning, around 1900, electric cars were the rage. Everyone wanted an electric vehicle. But what happened was technology improvements in automobiles really cut the gap. And so then what happens, by the time 1912 rolled around, and there was a gentleman named Kering who figured out how to automatically start a car, and then combined with the fact that it was perceived that there was cheap, unlimited source of fossil fuel, everyone had been using automobiles ever since. Except for me. In 2009, I made the conscious choice to buy a hybrid. And yes, it cost me money. And at the time, I had a good job and I could afford it because I thought it was important to contribute to our planet. But in retrospect, I thought about it and I said, why should the fact that I had a job and had the money to make that choice affect that choice? It shouldn't come down to having the funds to do the right thing. And so technology has moved forward with renewable energy technologies, which have almost brought the cost of renewable technologies almost to the cost of fossil fuels. However, we are not quite all the way there. And so then the question comes into and says, well, how do we close the gap in terms of cost so that it's not an option? Well, one of the things that I've learned is anything that you want to allow people to use less of, if you price it more, its tendency tends to go down. For instance, cigarettes used to be 50% adoption years and years ago, and once that made more expensive, that number came down to 10%. And that is what we mean really by pricing carbon, in terms of making it more expensive as a way of promoting the adoption of other non-fossil fuel technologies, namely renewable energy. And so we do know how to solve this. If we want less of this, we need to make this more expensive. And so at this point, I wanted to talk about some options that we have in terms of making it more expensive. We all know what taxes are. Taxes are basically taken from your taxable income, and it's basically a product of your tax rate and your taxable income. And so the problem with taxes is taxes have the appearance of going away. Your tax money gets spent, where did it go? And so we at the Citizens Climate Lobby, and we'll talk about them later, but we prefer not to use the term tax because it has such a negative connotation. I can see the frowns. I said the word tax, and everyone started to frown. And so that's one of the pricing options that people have actually used to price carbon. The second option was a cap and trade. For those of you unfamiliar with a cap and trade places firm limits on pollution. And then what happens is that's the cap. Now the trade is that companies can buy and purchase allowances against that to not emit pollutants into the atmosphere. And what it's designed to do is to create a market for stopping pollution. And so California, for instance, has a cap and trade program. It's the fourth largest in the world behind the UK's program, Guangdong, China, and Korea. And so what happened, it was passed by AB 32 in 2013 is when it actually became implemented. And so it was designed to do some things. It was designed to reduce emissions. The goals of it were between the years 2013 and 2020 to reduce emissions by around 15% or so, and then another 40% up to the year 2020. And so it was pretty ambitious. All right, so then the question comes down to is, how has that worked out for the state of California? The data that I was able to find was that it reduced emissions 1.5% in the year 2015, which was the latest data that was available. And so, but ultimately, and what the next slide after that is, it really has been a work in progress. And so more time is going to have to see to whether we would really get the full impact of the cap and trade. But good has come out of it. And a lot of the funds that were provided by the fees have funded a lot of renewable energy programs, and it also has helped in the local economies, especially in disadvantaged communities. So there has been some good that has come out of it. However, more time will need to go to really see the full impact. Okay, some of the good things that came out of the cap and trade program in California among helping disadvantaged communities, and it also helped clean the air. And so it did actually have some positive effect. The last pricing option that I'd like to talk to you guys about is fee and dividend. The whole idea is that there would be a fee collected for the use of carbon products, and every month there would be a check distributed to the American people to use however they would like. And so the whole idea is money to the people, not to the government. And so then the question is, how much money would that involve? Well, at first, it would be roughly $16 to $24 per month per person, And that fee will increase over time, so that over time, the revenues would increase. And so we at the Citizens Climate Lobby were big proponents of the fee and dividend because we thought that it was a really great first start in terms of battling climate change. Because remember, at this point, there really is no policy to really combat climate change. And so a little bit about the Citizens Climate Lobby. We have over 400 chapters, both in the US and overseas, and we focus on working with our elected officials to shape climate change policy. And so we are international, nonpartisan, we build relationships with everyone. We are nonprofit. We are solution focused, and that solution is a carbon fee and dividend. And then finally, we treat everyone, even those who oppose us, with respect, appreciation, and gratitude. We are fighting for a livable world. We at the Citizens Climate Change think that we are the ones that are responsible for putting our planet in the position that it's in, but we are also the ones responsible for the solution. And so I wanted to share with you, there was a study done by the Regional Economic Models Incorporated by the CCL on what a carbon fee dividend would do. And they looked at the emissions, the economy, and the job and incomes. And here's what they came up with. As far as emissions, it predicted that emissions would peak slightly before turning down. And ultimately, it would reduce emissions by roughly 10% over 10 years, and another roughly 30% over 20 years. It also projected that it would produce 2.1 million jobs within 20 years and roughly 2.8 million jobs within 30 years. And so now that we're producing jobs, this would also go back to increase the gross domestic product. It was estimated that in the next 50 years, it could produce over 35 to 70 billion dollars of gross domestic product. And what it really works is like a stimulus bill. You remember the stimulus package. We put money into the economy, and then that would drive jobs, and that would also drive GDP. Health. We all know that emitting fossil fuels cause pollutants, mainly asthma, respiratory issues. And so it was predicted that this would save over 13,000 lives every year due to emissions that wouldn't be emitted. And over the course of the next 20 years, the possibility of saving over 227,000 lives. And then finally, it would help boost income because, as I said, the fee would increase over time. And so within the next 20 years, roughly it would be $300 for every American family a month. And within 30 years, roughly $400 per month. And that goes into your pocket to spend as you like. And so we were very, very, very pleased when it's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act was introduced into Congress. And this had many of the things that the CCL wanted. Mainly the fee and dividend. And the way it was going to work is in the first year, carbon was going to be taxed wherever it came into the country at $15 per megaton. And then it would increase $10 per megaton every year thereafter. And that's for the first time, and there's the change, that we're actually putting a price and a value on carbon. Now, I also should add that what's going to happen is this bill has been introduced, but given the political climate, it's going to have a challenging time to pass. So what's going to happen is it's going to be reintroduced in future sessions of Congress, perhaps after 2020, there's going to be a better political landscape. And that's why I'm here, so that when you see it again, you know to let your politicians know that this is something that you think is important. And so at this point, I need everyone to go out and talk to people about it and say, we need to price carbon. We need to take steps to combat climate change. And part of that is speaking, getting the word out. Another part of that is making personal lifetime choices to reduce our footprint. And so there are lots of ways that we can reduce carbon just by our life choice. One of the things we can do is we can eat less meat, just for the sake of example. And so now that a proposal to price carbon has been introduced, the time for change is here. And it is very, very, very overdue. And so this carbon fee and dividend, we believe, is a first step on putting us on the road to having a more livable planet. One thing I wanted to say is that other countries have stepped up and made the decision to price carbon. We can as well. And so I wanted to finish with a quote. Faith is taking the first step even if you do not see the entire staircase, which was by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And this carbon fee and dividend is a first step. And so my thinking is, in terms of our planet that has nurtured us and supported us, is one step too much to ask in terms of ensuring that we have a livable future? And on that note, I'd be more than happy to take questions.
Can you do this on the state level, or is it gonna be on the federal level?
Well, actually, due to really no consistent policy on the national level, most of the action has occurred at this point on the state level. And so, but we feel it's kind of important that as a country, we need to have policy. If you look at polls and things, most Americans believe that we need to do things about climate change. However, that is not being impressed upon our politicians and Congress, which is something that needs to change. And so I think on a national level, there are steps that need to be taken. Now, even though states will take the lead, California, for instance, at a national level, I think policies need to be put in place to address climate change and the other issues that we need to deal with. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Any others?
What countries are, you said that other countries are pricing carbon?
Yes.
What other countries are doing that?
Well, China's pricing carbon. Actually, there are 11 or 12 other countries that are pricing. Pakistan is pricing carbon. The European Union is pricing carbon. Now, they've had various results, and I should also mention that some of them have decided to use a tax, some of them have decided to use a cap and trade, and some of them are in the process of really deciding which way to go. But there is a history of other countries deciding to price. Canada, for instance, is pricing carbon. And so the precedent has been set that for countries to price carbon, and I think it's time for the United States to kind of step in line.
Has anybody done the fee and dividend approach?
Yes, the fee and dividend approach has been introduced into Congress as a bill.
There was any other country doing it now?
Oh, it's any other countries of fee and dividend? I believe so. I'd have to look up to find the exact countries, but yeah, I believe there are a couple other countries that have tried this method of pricing carbon. And what people like about it is that the money goes into their pocket. Now, what I should have mentioned is it's designed to be 2/3 revenue neutral, being that 2/3 of America should make money on it. And in terms of the extra cost of some of the technologies, because we know what happens when the gas companies get a fee, they're going to pass that along. And so it's designed to help the common guy help offset that fee. Is there any question?
Yeah, well, saying it needs to be done on a national level, then I take it would fall to the federal government to administer such a
That would be correct. It would be like an income tax refund. And so what would happen, you'd get a Department of Treasury. Every family would get a check that would be generated every month from the fees from all the fossil fuels. Once they come into the country, whether it be at the mine, the port, or wherever, once they come into the country, that's when the fee would be assessed on the really upstream.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much.